Okay, so here I've drawn a little bit here so that you have an idea of what it looks like. Okay, and is it bright enough? Is it dark enough? I'm not sure. I haven't stepped back to look at it, but I will. After I've continued drawing for a little bit, I can step back and check to see whether the value is this is correct. If it's too dark, I will remove with my eraser. If it's too light, I'll just continue drawing. But what I like to do is actually work with both pencils at once, except that I'm not mixing the two. So here, for example, this area has a little bit of light area here. This area is really white, so I'm just going to go ahead, put that edge down. So I'm not erasing anything, okay? And cross-hatching again. Cross, hatch, small marks, okay? As long as in like their different direction, hold the pencil whichever way that you feel most comfortable, cross hatch in the direction that you feel most comfortable, okay? So this is fairly light, so I'm just moving along, just cross hatching. If the pencil gets dull, please make sure you sharpen it. Always keep it sharp and always draw with a point. So don't use the side, okay? Draw with a point. So notice that that's like this core shadow right here. We talked about that in the previous videos. That's when it's really, really dark. The object is turning away from the light rays as it passes, as it runs past them. So here it goes into shadow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, take my eraser very, very quickly, swipe off this construction that I had put in earlier, and I'm going to take my black pencil. I'm just going to put a line down the middle very lightly. Now remember, this is all with very light pressure, okay? And I'm going to draw and establish where that core shadow is. Right now with hatch marks, and it's very light, and then I will continue building it by overlapping it with other hatch marks so it becomes cross hatching. This edge here, it's pretty sharp, so I'm going to go ahead, and pretty dark, I'm going to go ahead and establish that. There seems to be a little bit of line here for that shadow. I'm just going to go ahead and establish that, okay? Now I'm just going to add that as you're cross hatching, when you're cross hatching like these sort of like lips, for example, or this little edge here, when you're shading, you don't have to cross hatch because it doesn't make sense to cross hatch right there. It's really, really hard. So that one you should just draw like normally, but for like the large areas, you should cross hatch. Now as I'm cross hatching, I'm not just cross hatching the core shadow, meaning the dark strip down the the length of that can, but I'm also cross hatching and shading right now the core shadow as well as the shadow edge or the shadow. So here is the core shadow and here is the shadow. That fuzzy area, that dark area, slight fuzzy area before it gets really, really dark, that connects, that bridges or connects that light area with the dark area. Remember I had mentioned that in the previous videos that area is super, super really like important, that if you don't put that into your drawing, it won't look 3D, okay? And you're going to continue to build. So let's do this. So how does this work? So essentially, you're going to incorporate the gray of that paper. Remember I said that. Use that gray of the paper as an active part of your value system. So here, it's the light's hitting here. It's really, really bright. It goes progressively darker, and it starts to get a little bit darker. Core shadow, really dark, reflected light right here. Okay, so here what I'm doing is many, many layers of white where it's facing the light source. Okay, so more layers of white, not as much paper showing. No pressure, just layers. Okay, as it moves towards the darker end, like going into shadow, a few layers of white, not as many layers as the side that's facing the light. Now letting more of that paper show through. Okay, so I'm still putting white, but don't put so many layers. And then here, still even fewer layers of white, like maybe one layer of white. And then I'm starting to go into shadow. So here I'm introducing that black, but letting maybe one layer of black, okay? So that I'm trying to bridge that gap here so that it creates that nice transition, right? So, and then here, if it's really light, I can add a little bit of white to create that reflected light. So let me flip over and show you, okay? If we continue to do this, and I've drawn one over here for you, and this one wasn't done in cross-hatching. This is just regular shading. But you notice this is essentially what I did, okay? From here, okay? If I continue to work on this, it would potentially look like this. Okay, so let me show you. So here, it's receiving light, okay? It's receiving light from the light source. So this is in light. If you want to get a nice clean edge, remember what I did? I drew it with a line first, but then I shaded next to it so the line disappears and it turns into an edge. If you want to get a nice clean edge, you shade on either side of that edge. So shade here as well as shade on the opposite side. So you got to shade here, and then you have to shade the opposite side, then you will get that nice crisp edge. So if you look at this, I've shaded here where the light source is, many layers of white, and then as it moves into, as the object turns away from the light source and goes into shadow, fewer layers of white, more of the paper showing through. So say about 5 layers of white here, less paper showing through, then here progressively less layers of white, so maybe 3 layers of white, a little bit more paper showing through, 2 layers of white, more paper showing through, 1 layer of white, a lot of the paper showing through, and then here, in this area here, it's not just gray paper, it's probably just a hint of black now, just a little hint of black, and maybe a little hint of white. So I'm going to use 2 hands here. So like a little bit of white here, a little bit of black here. So it creates a nice transition. No mixing, okay? So many layers of white, less white, more paper, less white, much more paper, very little white, a lot of paper, and then little bit of black, a lot of paper right here, and then more black, some paper, and then much more black, like more layers of black and less paper showing. Okay, so then you create that nice transition, and you need that fuzzy area here, which is the shadow. This is the core of shadow. This is the shadow that bridges that gap, or like connects the light area with the dark area. So here I put in a line because I need to see where that edge of the can is, but I wouldn't worry about that. I just put that down because then I'm going to pick up the values in the cloth and I can shade and make that line disappear, so then it becomes an edge, okay? It's okay to put a line there because you have to figure out where your edge of your object is, where the object begins, where another part, where the object begins and ends, and where another part begins and ends. You need to establish that. But then you draw and create the value that's similar to the line, so that that line disappears and becomes an edge. So I've drawn that as part of the value of the cloth. Now I can see that really nice clean edge right there. And notice that there's reflected light here. So I've added just a hint of white, okay? Now, is this bright enough compared to the still life? I don't think so. So I probably need to step back and then adjust accordingly. But this is what I've started to do. And now I will step back, look at my drawing, compare it to the still life. If I think it needs to be adjusted, and it does, it probably needs to be whiter, then I just add more layers. But remember, use the piece of paper. Once your paper gets dirty, as a protective sheet over your drawing so that you don't smudge your drawing. If it gets dirty, switch out a new sheet of paper. All right, that's common sense. Okay, so build, all right, and continue building that, but stepping back to make sure that you can check your values to see that your values are correct. And what about this? What is about this? What did I do here? Well, essentially what I did was letting a lot more paper show through, and then maybe putting just a little bit of white on top of that. Here, a lot of layers of white. here quite a bit of white, but here a very, maybe a layer of white, so that the paper is showing through, and that again, that gray of the paper becomes an active part of your drawing. So I'm incorporating the whole time while I'm drawing, I'm incorporating the value of the paper in with the drawing. Okay, so like if this, for example, if it's not dark enough, I continue to build it. Okay, now this mark making here is a little bit different from the one I started earlier in class or earlier in the video, is because this one is a smooth shading. So it's nice for you to see the difference between the two. So this is cross hatching, and I started to have cross hatching here, but I didn't finish. But I wanted to show you what it looks like once it looks more complete. But you know, this is a different technique of shading, which is the smooth technique. But here you can tell that I've captured the values accordingly, so that now the can starts to look 3D. Okay. This white here, sure, layers and layers of white, no pressure, just put more layers. Okay, and I probably could make this a little bit more, much brighter, to give that sort of shiny quality of the metallic part of the can. Okay, so what about reflected light? Do we need to always add white in the reflected light? No, you have to look at the values. So again, anything lighter in the still life than the gray of the paper, you add white. Anything darker than the gray of the paper, you add black. So like with the can here, that black can, I will have to add many layers of black. Okay, so here, why did I add white? Because to me, that reflected light is pretty bright. So I'm looking at it right now. If I left it the gray of the paper, it would not have been bright enough. So I had to add a little bit of white, just so that it made it have a little glow, like what I'm seeing in the still life. Okay, so I'm just adding a little. But notice that my reflected light is not as bright in, compared to the areas that are being exposed to the light source. Okay, so that's pretty much it. um, and again, very quickly before we go, check this. Like right now I can tell, just looking at this, that this is slightly off. My ellipse needs to be symmetrical, so this one is a little bit more curved than this, I can tell. So double check. If you're not sure, turn your drawing upside down or bring it to the mirror, so that any kind of discrepancy, anything that doesn't seem right, will show up in your drawing. Okay, and just very quickly to reiterate here with the construction, when I'm drawing a cylinder, and as well as this, notice I always have a center line, and then making sure that I have an axis here, okay, which is the symmetry axis for this ellipse, and it sits at a 90-degree angle. Same thing here, even that can is on its side, this makes a 90-degree angle, and I draw that cone and make sure that, I draw the ellipse and make sure that the ellipse is symmetrical. So pretty much this is the values here, and you will just continue drawing and making sure you step back, checking your values as you go along. Don't get too carried away by shading too quickly, or just continuing shading without checking your values. Make sure you continually get up, step away from your drawing a foot or so, check your values, check your proportions as you draw, and you will always be on the right track. And the other thing, very quickly also, I don't know, I just forgot. Okay, I think that's it.